Millionaire freezes when he sees a girl with a birthmark like his. Sir, are you my father? Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Rain drizzled against the windows of Brexton Cafe as Blake Anderson relaxed, loosening his tie with a deep, weary sigh. Another day, another multi-million-dollar deal sealed. Success had become a ritual for him, predictable, almost mundane. At 38, he had everything money could buy, but there was still something missing, something far more valuable than wealth. Blake glanced at his watch, 7:30 p.m. The pressure from the boardroom still clung to him, the tension lingering like the cold dampness outside. He longed for a moment of calm before heading back to his lonely penthouse apartment. "The usual, Mr. Anderson?" the barista asked, already preparing his Americano. Blake gave a distracted nod, but his gaze was drawn to a small figure standing outside in the rain. A little girl, no older than 6, was sitting by herself on the wet sidewalk under the cafe's awning. The sight of her alone in the cold, especially at this hour, unsettled him. Children shouldn't be alone at this time. Not in this weather, Blake thought. "Hold that coffee," he said, his voice low as he made his way outside. The little girl looked up as Blake's shadow fell across her. Her large brown eyes met his, holding an odd, calm composure for someone so young. Her clothes were neat but clearly worn, and her small backpack was clutched tightly against her chest. "Are you okay?" Blake asked, crouching down to her level. "Where are your parents?" "I'm waiting for my grandpa," she said confidently. "He's late sometimes." Blake nodded, noticing the way she tucked a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear, a gesture so familiar that it squeezed his white heart unexpectedly. "I'm Blake. What's your name?" he asked gently. "Madison Parker," she said, extending her small hand with an adult-like formality. Parker. The name struck Blake like a sudden blow, but he pushed the thought aside as mere coincidence. "Well, Madison, it's getting dark. How about we go inside where it's warm? I'll get you some hot chocolate while we wait for your grandpa." The little girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded and gathered her backpack. She reached for his hand, her sleeve sliding back slightly to reveal a crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist. Blake froze, his breath catching sharply. That birthmark, it was identical to his own, identical to his mother's. A rare family trait. "That's an interesting birthmark," Blake said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "My mom had the same one," Madison replied simply. "I never met her. She died when I was born." Blake felt the ground shift beneath him. "Your mother's name was Jessica?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Madison's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, did you know my mommy?" Blake's hand gripped the wall for support as memories rushed back to him. Jessica Parker. His first love, the woman he had lost touch with after college. "Madison, when's your birthday?" Blake asked, his voice tight. "February 12th, she answered. Exactly 9 months after Blake had last seen Jessica. "My daddy's name was Blake too," Madison continued, her tone matter of fact. "That's what Grandma told me. But he went away before I was born." In that moment, standing in the rain with a child he never knew existed, Blake Anderson's carefully built world shattered completely. Blake stared at the DNA results on his desk, the clinical confirmation of what he'd suspected since seeing Madison's crescent birthmark 2 weeks ago. 99.9% probability of paternity. The words blurred before him as he ran a hand through his hair. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself, though the evidence was irrefutable. Just then, his assistant Rachel knocked softly before entering his office. The investigator had called. "He found Jessica's death certificate," she said hesitantly. "And Madison's birth certificate. You're listed as the father." Blake's throat tightened. Why didn't she tell me? They may have broken up, but this... According to her parents, Jessica tried to reach him. "She called your office dozens of times," they had said. Blake frowned, feeling confused. "I never received any messages," he muttered. Rachel placed a folder on his desk. "I checked our records from that period. There were indeed calls from Jessica. but they were all marked as handled by your Uncle Harold. Blake's stomach dropped. Harold had been his mentor, the man who'd guided him through life after his parents passed. The idea that his uncle might have deliberately kept Madison from him seemed unthinkable. "There's more," Rachel continued, her voice steady. "I found these in the archived files." She slid several envelopes out from the folder, all addressed in Jessica's handwriting. They were all unopened, all marked "Return to sender" in handwriting Blake recognized as Harold's. He intercepted her letters. Blake whispered, fury beginning to build inside him. "It seems so," Rachel said quietly. "And there's something else." She hesitated for a moment, looking at Blake before speaking again. "Harold restructured your inheritance around that time, making him executive until you turned 40. Blake's heart pounded in his chest. "Or what? Or until you had a family of your own," Rachel finished. The pieces clicked together in Blake's mind with sickening clarity. Harold had controlled Blake's substantial inheritance for years. A child would have immediately ended that arrangement. Blake stood abruptly. "I need to see my uncle now." Harold's corner office exuded power, much like the man himself. At 65, Harold remained an imposing figure. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his expression remained calculating as Blake entered. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Harold asked smoothly. Blake threw the DNA results onto Harold's desk, the papers scattering in front of him. "Did you know?" Blake's voice was cold. Harold glanced at the papers without any change in his demeanor. "About your indiscretion with that Parker girl? Ancient history." "Not so ancient," Blake said, his voice tight. "I have a daughter." Harold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't flinch. "A regrettable situation, I'm sure, but hardly relevant to the company." "You kept her from me," Blake said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You hid Jessica's calls, you returned her letters." "Don't be dramatic," Harold replied dismissively. "You were 25, poised to take over as CEO. A child would have derailed everything. Everything we worked for. Everything you worked for." Blake's fists clenched. "You had no right." Harold leaned forward, his voice lowering, a hint of menace in his words. "I protected your future. That girl was never good enough for you. Or this family. Her child would only be a distraction." "Her name is Madison," Blake said through clenched teeth. "And she's my daughter." Harold's voice hardened. "Be reasonable. What exactly do you plan to do? Play daddy to some girl you've never met? You know nothing about raising a child." Blake turned to leave but paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "I'm meeting with my lawyers tomorrow," he said, his voice resolute. "I'm filing for custody." Harold's cold laugh echoed in the room. "You really think a workaholic bachelor with no parenting experience stands a chance? Don't throw away everything for some misplaced guilt." "Watch me," Blake replied, his voice firm, as he closed the door behind him. The Parker residence was modest, a small craftsman house with faded blue paint and a well-tended garden. Blake sat in his luxury car, palms sweating as he rehearsed what to say. This wasn't a business negotiation. This was his daughter. After 3 deep breaths, he finally approached the door. An elderly man with kind eyes answered. "Robert Parker, Jessica's father?" "Mr. Parker, I'm Blake Anderson. I believe you're expecting me." Robert's expression was guarded but not unkind. "Madison's excited to meet you properly. She hasn't stopped talking about the man with the same birthmark." Inside, Martha Parker sat stiffly on the couch, disapproval evident in every line of her face. Blake couldn't blame her. In her eyes, he was the man who had abandoned her pregnant daughter. "Mrs. Parker." He nodded respectfully. "You look just like your pictures," Martha said flatly. "Jessica kept them all." Blake's heart twisted at the mention of Jessica's name, but before he could respond, Madison bounded into the room, stopping abruptly when she saw him. "You came?" she asked, surprise coloring her voice. "I promised I would," Blake said, crouching down to her level. "I brought something. For you." He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a silver locket containing a photo of Jessica, that Blake had found in his old college albums. "That's my mommy," Madison whispered, touching the picture reverently. "It is," Blake agreed, his throat tight. "I thought you might like to have it." Madison studied him intently. "Are you really my dad?" The directness of her question caught him off guard, but he nodded. "Yes, Madison, I am." "Where were you before?" she asked, no accusation in her voice, just genuine curiosity. Blake glanced at the Parkers, then back to Madison. "I didn't know about you, sweetheart. If I had, I would have been here, I promise." As Madison showed Blake her room, his phone buzzed repeatedly. 12 missed calls from Harold. He silenced it. "She has your smile," Robert observed as Madison disappeared to fetch her drawings. Later that evening, Blake sat with Robert Parker on the porch swing. The old man's arthritic hands clutched a worn photo album. "Jessica kept a diary," Robert said, opening it to a page where a small key was taped. "She locked it away before she died. She said if anything happened to her, we should give this to you someday." The small diary, retrieved from a safety deposit box, contained Jessica's most private thoughts, her unwavering love for Blake, her determination that Madison would know her father. The final entry, dated the day before she died from Comp She. "Has Jessica's eyes," Blake replied softly. Robert nodded. "Jessica always said you'd come back someday, even at the end." The words felt like a knife to Blake's chest. "I would have, if I'd known." "Well, you're here now," Robert said. "The question is, are you staying?" Before Blake could answer, his phone lit up with a text from Rachel. "Emergency. Harold filed legal injunction claiming guardianship conflict. Lawyers waiting at." Martha appeared in the doorway. "Your real life is calling, Mr. Anderson. Madison doesn't need another disappointment." Blake pocketed his phone. "This is my real life now, Mrs. Parker. I'm not going anywhere." As if summoned by his words, Madison returned, her smile so much like his own. "Can you come back tomorrow?" she asked hopefully. Blake took her small hand in his. "Tomorrow and every day after that, if you'll let me." For the first time in years, Blake knew exactly where he belonged. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong," Madison giggled, watching Blake struggle with her hair ties. His fingers, skilled at signing multi-million-dollar contracts, fumbled with the simple task of creating pigtails. "Sorry, sweetheart. I've never done this before," Blake admitted, attempting once more to secure her dark curls. 3 weeks into his new role as Madison's father, Blake was learning that business acumen counted for nothing in the world of parenting. Bedtime routines, school lunches, and now hairstyling. Each day brought new challenges. "Perhaps I can help," a voice offered from the classroom doorway. Blake turned to see Madison's teacher, Olivia Chen, watching with amusement. Morning. Drop-off had become the most stressful part of his day. "Would you mind?" he asked gratefully. With practiced ease, Olivia fixed Madison's hair while explaining the technique. Blake watched intently, determined to learn. "There you go, Madison. Why don't you join the others at the reading corner?" Olivia suggested. Once Madison was out of earshot, Olivia turned to Blake. "How are you holding up?" "Is it that obvious?" Blake asked with a self-deprecating smile. "All new parents struggle," Olivia assured him. "Even those who've had 6 years to practice." Blake's phone buzzed again. Another text from Harold. He ignored it. "Listen," Olivia lowered her voice. "Madison's been drawing pictures of you in art class. She told everyone her daddy came back from a long trip." Blake's chest swelled with pride. "Thank you for telling me that," he said sincerely. "Parents' night is Thursday." Olivia mentioned, "I know it's short notice, but I'll be there." "I'll make sure of it," Blake promised immediately. As he left the school, his lawyer called. "Harold's pushing for a psychological evaluation," the lawyer explained, his voice tense. "He's claiming that your sudden interest in Madison is a midlife crisis, that it could harm her stability." Blake's jaw tightened. "He's getting desperate," he thought to himself. "There's more," the lawyer continued. "He's scheduled an emergency board meeting suggesting that your family situation is affecting company performance." Back at his office, Rachel waited with a stack of files. I've rescheduled your meetings to accommodate Madison's school hours, she said, handing him the files. And I found these. She handed him several parenting books and information on local father-daughter activities. Blake was momentarily speechless. Rachel, thank you. One more thing, she hesitated. Harold's been meeting with Jessica's ex-boyfriend. From after you two broke up. I don't know why, but it can't be good. Blake nodded grimly. Learning the rules of fatherhood was challenging enough, but doing it while fighting an increasingly hostile uncle was exhausting. That evening, as he tucked Madison into bed, she asked drowsily, "Are you going to go away again?" "No, Madison," Blake said firmly, kissing her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since discovering her existence, Blake felt like Madison might actually believe him. Blake found the box tucked away in Jessica's old room, forgotten in the corner of the Parkers' attic. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to him, all unopened. "We didn't know about these," Martha explained, her previous coldness softening slightly. Jessica must have written them during her pregnancy. With trembling hands, Blake opened the first letter, dated 8 years ago. "Blake, I have news that will change everything," Jessica had written. "I'm carrying our child. I've called your office 17 times. Your uncle says you're too busy to speak with me. I don't believe him." Each letter revealed more of Jessica's journey, her determination to reach him, her hope that he would come back, her love for their unborn child. The final letter, written just days before her death, broke him completely. "I still believe you. Would have wanted to know her. I've named her Madison. She has your birthmark. Blake, someday I hope she finds you." Grief and rage warred inside him. Harold hadn't just kept him from his daughter. He'd stolen Jessica's last years from him too. At his office, Rachel waited with grim news. Harold leaked documents to the press suggesting you're pursuing Madison for tax benefits. It's all over the business blogs. Blake's phone rang. It was Madison's school. "Mr. Anderson, there's been an incident," Olivia explained. "Some children were teasing Madison about the news articles. She's quite upset." When Blake arrived, Madison was sitting alone, tears streaking her face. Tommy said, "You only want me for money?" she whispered, her voice full of pain. "Is that true?" Blake knelt beside her. "Never. You're the most important person in my life. But you're always working, and you get mad when I mess up," she said, her words stinging with truth. Despite his best intentions, Blake had been impatient when Madison spilled juice on important papers and distracted during their time together by constant work emergencies. "I'm still learning how to be a good dad," he admitted, his voice thick. "But I promise to do better." That evening, Harold appeared at Blake's door uninvited. "This charade has gone far enough," Harold said, dropping a folder on the table. "Jessica was seeing someone else when she got pregnant. There's a chance Madison isn't even yours." Blake's blood ran cold. "The DNA test can be manipulated," Harold interrupted. "The Parkers are desperate for financial support. Think about it." When Harold left, doubt crept in. Despite Blake's efforts to ignore it, questions lingered. Why had Jessica never mentioned anyone else? His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know the truth about Jessica. Meet me tomorrow alone." Attached was a photo of Jessica with another man, dated during the time they were supposedly together. Blake stared at the image, the ground shifting beneath him once again. Everything he thought he knew about Jessica, about Madison, about his newfound purpose. Suddenly, none of it felt certain anymore. The cafe where Blake agreed to meet the mysterious messenger was nearly empty. A man approached, mid-40s, disheveled, with a hungry look in his eyes. "You must be Blake Anderson," the man said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I'm Mark Stevens. I dated Jessica briefly after you two split." Blake studied him wearily. "You sent the photo?" "Harold paid me to," Mark admitted bluntly. $10 grand to say I was with Jessica when she got pregnant. He has more photos, all doctored." Blake's relief was immediate, followed by disgust. Why are you telling me this? Because Jessica deserved better, Mark said quietly. She never got over you, even when we dated. Your name was always on her lips. When she found out she was pregnant, she ended things with me immediately. Did you know her when she had Madison? Blake asked. Mark nodded. I was there the day she died. Her last words were about you, that she was finally going to find you and introduce you to your daughter. The revelation hit Blake like a physical blow. All these years he'd thought Jessica had deliberately kept Madison from him, when she'd been fighting to reach him until her last breath. After Mark left, Blake drove straight to the company headquarters, where the board meeting was already in progress. Harold was mid-presentation when Blake entered. This is highly irregular, Harold sneered, clearly distracted. The company needs stable leadership. I'd like to address the board, Blake interrupted. Harold's face reddened. I'm still CEO. Actually, Blake coolly reminded him, I'm taking a 3-month leave of absence. My daughter needs me, and I need time to be the father she deserves, Harold scoffed. This proves my point exactly. No, Uncle, Blake continued, his voice steady. It proves I finally understand what matters. For years, I've put this company first. I've missed holidays, relationships, life itself. I won't miss being Madison's father, too. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Harold slammed his fist on the table. You're throwing away everything your father built. I'm saving what matters most, Blake countered. This company will be here in 3 months. My daughter's childhood won't wait. Lications during birth read simply, Tomorrow I'll have our daughter in my arms, and soon after I'll find you, Blake. We'll be a family at last. As Blake closed the diary, his phone rang. It was his lawyer. Harold has filed for emergency. Guardianship of Madison, claiming you're mentally unfit. The hearing is set for next week. The battle lines were drawn. Blake wasn't just fighting for his daughter anymore. He was fighting for the future Jessica had died believing in. Madison squealed as Blake pushed her on the swing, her laughter carrying across the park. These Saturday morning outings had become their ritual over the past month, a simple pleasure that neither of them took for granted. Blake checked his watch. No urgent calls, no meetings. For the first time in his career, work wasn't his priority. The leave of absence had been the right decision, despite Harold's continued legal maneuvers. Watch me jump! Madison called, launching herself from the swing with fearless abandon. Blake's heart leaped to his throat, but she landed safely, grinning triumphantly. Careful, sweetheart, he cautioned, though he couldn't help smiling. At her adventurous spirit. You worry too much, said a voice behind him. Blake turned to find a woman watching them, her expression warm with recognition. Sarah Williams, she introduced herself. I was Jessica's best friend. Recognition dawned from the photos in Jessica's room. Sarah nodded. I've been hoping to meet you. The Parkers told me you're fighting for Madison. They sat on a bench while Madison played nearby, Sarah sharing stories that filled crucial gaps in Blake's understanding of Jessica's final years. She created this memory box, Sarah explained, handing Blake a small package for Madison's important milestones. Jessica recorded videos, wrote letters for her birthdays, graduation, even her wedding. Someday. Blake's throat tightened. She thought of everything, he realized. She never doubted you'd find each other eventually. She said that? Blake asked softly. Sarah smiled, even when everyone told her to move on. Later that afternoon, Blake and Madison sat surrounded by Jessica's memories, photos, trinkets, and recordings that brought her presence into the room. Mom was pretty, Madison observed, touching a photo reverently. The most beautiful person I've ever known, Blake agreed. Inside and out. They watched a video Jessica had recorded shortly before Madison's birth. Her voice was strong despite her obvious fatigue. Madison, my sweet girl, if you're watching this, know that you are so loved. Your father would have adored you as much as I do. Find him someday. Madison looked up at Blake, her eyes shining with tears and something else. Understanding. She wanted us to be together, she said simply. More than anything. Blake confirmed. That evening, as he tucked Madison into bed, Madison studied him thoughtfully. "I made something for you," she said, pulling a drawing from under her pillow. The crayon artwork showed three figures, a tall man, a little girl, and a woman surrounded by stars. "That's you, me, and Mom," Madison explained. Watching from heaven, Blake swallowed hard. "It's perfect." As he turned to switch off the light, Madison's voice stopped him. "Good night, Dad." Three simple words that shifted his entire world into perfect alignment. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Outside Madison's door, his phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. "Harold withdrawing the guardianship petition, victory." Blake smiled, tucking the phone away. The real victory was sleeping peacefully in the room behind him, finally calling him Dad. Blake stared at the quarterly reports, the numbers swimming before his eyes. 3 a.m. and he was still working, desperately trying to save the Miller account that had mysteriously started to unravel during his absence. His phone buzzed, an urgent email from the board. 3 major clients had threatened to withdraw their business, citing instability in leadership. Harold's fingerprints were all over this. The kitchen light flicked on, revealing Madison in her pajamas clutching the stuffed elephant he'd given her. "Why are you still awake?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Blake closed his laptop. "Just some work, sweetheart." "What's wrong?" she asked, concern in her voice. "I had the dream again about Mom," Madison said quietly, her voice trembling. Blake pulled her onto his lap, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. These nightmares had started after Harold had sent a reporter to Madison's school, resulting in an article questioning whether a workaholic bachelor could provide proper care. "Grandpa's coughing got worse," Madison whispered. Blake's stomach tightened. Robert's health had deteriorated rapidly in recent weeks. Pneumonia, the doctors said, but Blake suspected the stress of Harold's constant legal maneuvers was taking its toll. "Well, we'll visit them tomorrow," Blake promised. Morning brought more complications. Olivia called while Blake was making breakfast. "There's a social worker here," she said, her voice tense, asking questions about Madison's home life. Blake's jaw clenched. "Harold." "Blake, they're saying Madison seems distressed at school. You need to come in." At the school, the social worker, clearly primed by Harold, questioned Blake's ability to balance work and parenting. Olivia defended him fiercely, her hand occasionally brushing his in silent support. The contact sent unexpected warmth through him. Their growing closeness had been the one bright spot in recent weeks. "Thanks for having my back," Blake told her afterward. "Always," Olivia replied, her smile making his heart race in a way he hadn't felt since Jessica. That afternoon, Martha Parker called, her voice filled with tears. "Robert's been hospitalized. They're saying it's his heart now," she sobbed. "Blake, we've been Madison's whole world. If something happens to Robert..." The unspoken question hung in the air. Would Madison move in with Blake permanently? Blake arrived at the hospital to find Harold already there, speaking quietly with a doctor. "Trying to undermine me with the Parkers now?" Blake demanded once the doctor left. Harold's expression remained calm. "I'm genuinely concerned about Robert's health. Unlike you, I'm not using a child as a pawn. You manipulated everything from the beginning," Blake hissed. "You kept me from Jessica, from Madison, and look at what's happening now that you're involved." Harold interrupted, his voice cold. "Robert's health is failing. Madison's having nightmares, your company's losing millions." Blake flinched as Harold pressed on. "Face it, everyone was better off before you decided to play daddy." The doubt that Blake had been fighting crept back in. Was Harold right? Was he making everyone's lives worse? His phone chimed. The Miller account was officially pulling out. Millions in revenue gone. Everything was falling apart, and Blake wasn't sure how much longer he could hold it all together. The boardroom fell silent as Blake entered. 14 stern faces turned toward him. Harold, at the head of the table, had a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Glad you could join us, Blake," Harold said coolly. "We were just discussing the company's future." Blake had rushed from the hospital where Robert's condition had stabilized, but remained serious. The emergency board meeting, called without his knowledge, felt like the final piece of Harold's elaborate chess game. "What's this about?" Blake demanded. The board chairman cleared his throat. "Given recent developments, we've voted to temporarily remove you as CEO. Effective immediately." The words hit Blake like a physical blow. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice tight. Harold slid a document across the table. "The Miller account's departure triggered a domino effect. We've lost 4 major clients. Stock is down 17%. Clients. You pressured to leave," Blake countered, anger rising. "That's a serious accusation," Harold replied calmly. "Do you have proof?" Blake didn't, and they both knew it. A knock interrupted them. Blake's assistant, Rachel, entered, her face pale. "I'm sorry, but you need to see this," she whispered, handing Blake her tablet. On screen was a breaking news story. CEO's secret past. Blake Anderson abandoned pregnant girlfriend. Accompanying it was a fabricated email, allegedly from Blake to Jessica, declining any responsibility for her pregnancy. "This is a lie," Blake said through clenched teeth. "I never wrote this," Harold feigned concern. "The timestamp matches when Jessica tried to reach you. Perhaps you've forgotten." Before Blake could respond, his phone rang. It was Martha Parker. "The reporter showed us the email," she said, her voice brittle with anger. "How could you? All this time pretending you didn't know." "Martha, it's not true. We don't want you near Madison anymore," she cut him off. "Robert and I are filing for permanent guardianship." The room spun around Blake. In one brutal stroke, he'd lost his company and, potentially, his daughter. Outside the boardroom, Olivia waited, her expression grave. "The school received calls from concerned parents," she said quietly. "The principal feels it would be best if you didn't attend the father-daughter dance tomorrow." "You don't believe this garbage, do you?" Blake asked desperately. Olivia's hesitation was answer enough. "I want to believe you, Blake. But the evidence—" "Evidence Harold fabricated," Blake interrupted. "I need to think about what's best for Madison," Olivia said, stepping back. Maybe we should take a step back from us for now." By evening, Blake sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by the toys and books he'd bought for Madison's planned visits. His phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Madison's been crying since she heard the news. She doesn't understand why you lied." A knock at the door revealed Harold, looking almost sympathetic. "I came to offer a solution," he said smoothly. "Resign permanently as CEO. Sign over your voting shares, and I'll make the story disappear. The Parkers will let you see Madison occasionally." Blake stared at his uncle, the man who had systematically dismantled his life. "Why?" Blake whispered. "Why destroy everything I care about?" Harold's facade cracked, revealing the bitterness beneath. "Your father chose you over me despite my sacrifices. I built this company while he coddled you. Then he left everything to his precious son." As Harold left, Blake realized he'd lost everything. His company, Madison's, trust, Olivia's support, and the future he'd begun to believe in. The photograph of Jessica stared back at him, her smile a painful reminder of all he'd failed to protect. Blake sat alone in his childhood home, a place he'd avoided for years. Dust sheets covered the furniture. Memories lurked in every shadow. After losing everything, he'd retreated to the one place Harold couldn't touch, the modest house his parents had owned before his father's business success. A week had passed since his world imploded. No calls from Madison, no responses to his texts explaining the fabricated emails. His lawyer's attempts to counter Harold's narrative had met brick walls at every turn. Blake pulled out Jessica's diary, reading her words again, searching for something he might have missed. Her final entry still haunted him. "We'll be a family at last. I failed you," he whispered. "I failed Madison." Blake wandered through the silent rooms, eventually finding himself in his father's old study. The family photo on the desk showed happier times, Blake at 10, his parents smiling, and Harold standing slightly apart, his expression unreadable. Had the resentment always been there, Blake wondered? How had I never seen it? On impulse, Blake opened his father's desk drawer, finding old business files, family documents, and a sealed envelope addressed to him in his father's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 2 days before his father's fatal heart attack. Blake, I fear Harold's influence on you is becoming unhealthy. He sees the company as his life's achievement, not a means to create meaning and value. Remember why we built this company, not for wealth or power, but to create something lasting, something that matters. Don't let ambition steal your chance at happiness. I've watched you follow Harold's path, putting success above relationships. Don't make my mistakes. I lost years with you pursuing what Harold convinced me was important. It wasn't. You are. Blake sank into his father's chair, the truth washing over him. He'd spent years becoming the man Harold wanted him to be. Driven, ruthless, alone. Exactly what his father had warned against. The doorbell broke his reverie. Rachel stood on the porch, clutching a thick folder. I've been worried about you, she said as she stepped inside. And I found something. The folder contained evidence of Harold's manipulation, intercepted communications between Jessica and Blake going back years, financial records showing Harold's systematic appropriation of Blake's inheritance, and, most damning of all, Harold's recent communications with the clients who'd abandoned Anderson Enterprises. How did you get these? Blake asked. Stunned. Harold's assistant likes me better than him, Rachel replied with a small smile. There was enough evidence to prove Harold's deception, potentially allowing Blake to regain control of the company. Yet as Blake reviewed the documents, he realized something profound. The company no longer seems important, he said softly. What matters then? Rachel asked. Madison, being the father she deserves. Blake stood, sudden clarity filling him. Harold took everything because I valued the wrong things. My father tried to warn me. Jessica knew what mattered. She always did. He pulled out his phone, opening the photo of Madison's drawing, the three of them as a family, Jessica watching. From the stars. I know what I need to do, Blake said. That night he drove to the cemetery where Jessica was buried. He'd avoided coming here, afraid to face the magnitude of his loss. But now he needed to connect with her. Kneeling beside her grave, Blake spoke from his heart, telling her about Madison, her smile, her laughter, her strength, so like her. Mothers, he spoke of his regrets, his anger at Harold's betrayal, and his fear of losing Madison forever. I won't let him win, Blake promised. Not this time. I'll fight for her. Not with money or power, but with the truth, with love, the way you would have. As dawn broke over the cemetery, Blake felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Harold had taken his company, his reputation, even temporarily Madison's trust. But he couldn't take Blake's determination to be the father Jessica had believed he could be. Standing, Blake made a silent vow to the woman who had never stopped believing in him. He would reclaim what truly mattered, not his company, but his daughter's heart. Blake stared at the weathered oak door of the Parker residence, steeling himself for rejection. The evidence folder Rachel had assembled felt heavy in his hands, truth that could clear his name, but might not heal the hurt he'd caused. Martha answered, her expression hardening instantly. I told you not to come. Please, Blake said quietly. 5 minutes for Madison. Something in his voice must have reached her because Martha stepped aside reluctantly. The living room was silent, except for the steady beep of medical equipment. Robert had been discharged but remained bedridden, an oxygen tube snaking across his weathered face. You shouldn't be here, Robert said, though without the anger Blake expected. Blake placed the folder on the coffee table. I didn't know about Jessica's pregnancy. These documents prove Harold intercepted her calls, returned her letters, fabricated that email. He's been manipulating all of us for years. Martha leafed through the papers, her hands trembling slightly. Even if this is true, it doesn't change what Madison's going through. She trusted you. I know, Blake acknowledged, and I'll spend the rest of my life earning that trust back, if you'll let me see her. Robert and Martha exchanged glances. Finally, Robert nodded wearily. She's at Sarah's house, Jessica's friend. She didn't want to stay here after everything. The understanding in Robert's eyes nearly broke Blake. The older man reached for his hand. "Jessica would have fought for you," Robert said softly. "Go fight for our girl." Sarah's apartment was small but warm, filled with photos of Jessica. She greeted Blake with cautious optimism. "She's confused," Sarah warned. "She thinks you lied about not knowing Jessica was pregnant." Madison sat on the couch, her small body rigid with hurt. When she saw him, the weariness in her eyes, so like Jessica's, cut deeper than any business loss. "Madison," Blake began, kneeling before her, "I need to tell you something important." He explained in simple terms how Harold had kept him from knowing about her, showing her Jessica's unsent letters, the evidence Rachel had gathered. Most importantly, he showed her the memory box Jessica had created, a proof of how much both her parents had wanted her. "Your mom never stopped trying to reach me," Blake explained gently. "And if I had known about you, nothing would have kept me away." Madison's expression remained guarded. "Uncle Harold said you didn't want a kid. That's why you stayed away." "Harold didn't tell the truth," Blake replied. "I've made mistakes, but not loving you was never one of them." He pulled out a small box. Inside was the deed to his childhood home. "I'm moving back here permanently," he explained. "It's closer to your school. It has a big backyard. There's a room waiting just for you whenever you're ready." Madison's eyes widened slightly. "What about your fancy apartment? Your company?" "They don't matter," Blake said simply. "You do." The first crack in Madison's armor appeared, a tiny softening around her eyes. "Can I think about it?" she asked quietly. "Take all the time you need," Blake assured her. "I'm not going anywhere." Olivia was grading papers when Blake arrived at her classroom after school hours. "I have evidence clearing my name," he said without preamble. "Harold fabricated everything." She studied the documents carefully. "I wanted to believe you," she admitted. "Madison misses you," Olivia added. "She keeps drawing pictures of you in art class." "I've made mistakes," Blake acknowledged, putting work before relationships, letting Harold influence him. "But loving Madison isn't one of them." Olivia's professional reserve melted slightly. "The father-daughter dance is Friday. Maybe you could still come?" Blake's lawyer reviewed the evidence against Harold with growing confidence. "This is enough to remove him from the board and potentially file criminal charges," she explained. "Several board members are already questioning Harold's leadership after the stock plummeted further this week." But Blake had stopped, listening. His attention was caught by a small detail in one document, a clause in his father's will that Harold had concealed. "This says the company was always meant to establish a charitable foundation in my mother's name," Blake realized. "The profits were supposed to help children who lost parents, just like Madison nearly lost both of us. The purpose his father had intended for the company, not wealth or power, but creating something meaningful, crystallized in Blake's mind. Later, that day he called a trusted board member. "I need your help," Blake explained. "Not to get my job back, but to honor what Anderson Enterprises was always meant to be." For the first time since finding Madison, Blake saw the complete picture, not just reclaiming what Harold had taken, but building something better for his daughter's future. The annual Anderson Enterprises Charity Gala gleamed with wealth and privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over the city's elite as they discussed business deals and summer homes. Blake adjusted his tie, feeling like an outsider despite having hosted this event for years. He wasn't CEO tonight, just a man, with the truth burning in his pocket and determination in his heart. "Are you scared, Dad?" Madison squeezed his hand. The word Dad still sent warmth through his chest every time she said it. The past 2 weeks had brought cautious reconciliation. Madison spending weekends at his childhood home, slowly rebuilding trust. "A little," Blake admitted. "But doing the right thing is more important than being scared." Olivia stood, on Madison's other side, elegant in a simple blue dress. Her quiet support had become his anchor through the storm. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we're with you." Harold held court at the center of the room, playing the benevolent leader. His smile faltered when he spotted Blake. "You weren't invited," Harold said coldly, approaching them. "Actually, I was," Blake replied. Several board members had privately expressed doubts about Harold's leadership, arranging Blake's invitation to gauge the situation. Harold's eyes narrowed at Madison. "Using a child as a prop, a new low even for you." Madison stepped forward, surprisingly calm. "He's not using me. I wanted to come." Harold's face hardened. "This is hardly appropriate for a child." "Neither is lying to separate her from her father," Blake countered. The room quieted as tension crackled between them. Blake nodded to Rachel, who activated the presentation system. The massive screens displayed the evidence. Harold's intercepted communications, forged documents, financial manipulations for 8 years. Blake addressed the stunned crowd. "Harold Montgomery kept me from knowing I had a daughter. He intercepted Jessica Parker's messages, returned her letters, and hid the truth." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Harold's face flushed with fury. "These documents prove he fabricated evidence to turn Madison's grandparents against me," Blake continued. "He manipulated clients to leave the company, forcing the board to remove me." Board members exchanged troubled glances as Blake concluded. "I'm not here to reclaim my position. I'm here because my father founded this company with a purpose Harold buried, to help children who lost parents. Like Madison nearly lost both of us." Harold lunged for the microphone. "This is absurd. He's desperate." "It's true," came a frail voice from the entrance. Robert Parker stood, supported by Martha, his oxygen tank beside him. Their presence silenced the room completely. "We've seen the evidence," Martha added. "Harold lied to all of us." Harold's composure cracked entirely. "This company is mine. I built it while William coddled his precious son. Naked resentment shocked the crowd. 3 board members immediately moved to Blake's side, symbolically shifting allegiance. Harold saw his empire crumbling. In desperation, he pulled Blake aside. "Walk away now," he hissed. "I'll reinstate you as CEO, give you controlling interest. Just drop this crusade and leave the girl with her grandparents where she belongs." Blake studied the man who had shaped his life, his mentor, his uncle, his betrayer. "You still don't understand," Blake said quietly. "I'm not choosing between Madison and the company. I'm choosing to be the man Jessica believed I could be, the father Madison deserves." Harold's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." "No," Blake replied, his voice firm. "That's what I did when I let you convince me success meant more than family." As Harold stormed out, Madison slipped her hand into Blake's. "You chose me," she said, wonder in her voice. Every time Blake promised, lifting her into his arms, the board chairman approached. "We need to talk about the future of Anderson Enterprises," he said. Blake nodded, but his focus remained on Madison's smile, the true measure of his success. The headlines declared victory. Anderson Enterprises reclaims legacy, family fraud exposed, CEO reinstated after uncle's deception revealed. But Blake knew better than to celebrate. Harold's humiliation made him dangerous, and Blake couldn't shake the feeling that the final battle was yet to come. His fears materialized 3 days after the gala. The Parker home was eerily quiet when Blake arrived for Madison's weekend visit. No Robert in his usual spot by the window. No Martha fussing in the kitchen. "Hello?" Blake called, unease crawling up his spine. A manila envelope sat on the coffee table with his name scrawled across it. Inside was a court order and a letter from Martha. "We've taken Madison to our lake house. Harold's lawyers contacted us with evidence that your company's financial troubles could impact Madison's future. We need time to think. Please don't follow us." Blake's hands shook as he dialed their number. No answer. The lake house was 4 hours away, and they deliberately left without telling him. His lawyer's voice was grim when he called her. "Harold moved fast. He's filed an emergency petition claiming your ability to provide for Madison is compromised. He's leveraged Robert's medical bills. Apparently he's been secretly paying them, creating financial dependency. He can't take her," Blake whispered. There's more, she continued. The board meeting tomorrow. Harold's rallied minority shareholders. He's claiming your emotional instability threatens the company's recovery. He's offering to buy their shares at premium prices. Blake's world tilted sideways. After everything, the truth revealed, Harold's deception exposed, he was still at risk of losing both Madison and the company his father built. What do I do? Blake asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Choose, his lawyer said, bluntly. Fight Harold for the company, or fight for Madison. We don't have resources for both battles simultaneously. The choice that had once seemed so clear suddenly felt impossible. The company wasn't just wealth and power. It was his father's legacy, the source of security he wanted to provide for Madison, the foundation for the charitable work he'd planned. Blake drove to his childhood home, mind racing. Inside, Madison's drawings covered the refrigerator. Her favorite stuffed elephant waited on her bed. Evidence of the family they were becoming surrounded him. His phone rang. Olivia. The Parkers called the school, she said. They're withdrawing Madison temporarily, Blake explained. Harold. One last move to destroy everything. After hanging up, Blake sat in his father's study, crushed by the weight of his impossible choice. Fight for the company that could secure Madison's future, or fight for custody of the daughter who had already lost so much. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Rachel entered, her expression grim. You need to see this, she said, placing a tablet before him. On screen was footage from the company's secure server, Harold with Jessica 8 years ago. The timestamp matched the period after she discovered her pregnancy. If you pursue this, I'll destroy him, Harold told a tearful Jessica. Blake will lose everything. His inheritance, his future. Is that what you want for your child's father? Jessica's voice shook. Blake deserves to know about his child. Then you'll both suffer, Harold threatened. Consider this my only warning. The footage cut off. Blake stared at the blank screen, ice flooding his veins. Where did you get this? He demanded. I found it hidden in encrypted files, Rachel replied. Harold kept it as insurance, proof of his threat. Blake's grief hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about him or even Madison anymore. It was about justice for Jessica, who had tried to protect him while fighting for their child. His phone lit up with a text from Martha. Madison keeps asking for you. She doesn't understand why we left. Another message followed. A photo of Madison clutching the locket with Jessica's picture, tears streaming down her face. Blake stood, decision made. Harold had given him an impossible choice, forcing him to sacrifice either his daughter or his legacy. But perhaps there was another way, one that would require him to risk everything. Dawn broke over the cemetery, golden light filtering through. The morning mist as Blake approached Jessica's grave. He wasn't surprised to find Harold already there, staring contemplatively at the headstone. You knew I would come here, Blake said quietly. Harold didn't turn. You always were. Predictable. Sentimental like your father. Blake placed fresh flowers beside Jessica's name. I've made my decision. I'm not fighting you for the company. Harold turned, triumph flickering across his face. Finally, Blake shook his head. No. Finally showing some courage. I'm giving it all away. Harold's expression hardened. What are you talking about? I've transferred my shares to the Jessica Parker Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to supporting single parents and children who've lost a parent. The paperwork was filed last night. Harold's face paled. You can't do that. It's already done, Blake said. The shares can never be sold or transferred, only used to fund the foundation's work. My father's original vision for the company before you corrupted it. Harold lunged forward, grabbing Blake's lapels. You've destroyed everything I built. No, Blake said calmly, removing Harold's hands. I've saved what matters. The board will never accept this, Harold snarled. They already have, Blake replied. 4 directors signed on as foundation trustees this morning. Rage twisted Harold's features. And what about your precious daughter? How will... You support her without the company? I don't need millions to be a good father, Blake replied. Jessica understood that. She knew what really mattered. The fight seemed to drain from Harold suddenly, leaving him looking old and defeated. You've chosen a child over an empire, he whispered. I've chosen love over power, Blake corrected. Something you never understood, Harold scoffed. And the Parkers, they've taken Madison away. They're bringing her home today, Blake said. Once they saw the video of you threatening Jessica, they understood everything. The court has already dismissed your petition. Harold's expression shifted to something Blake had never seen before. Fear. That video was private, Harold whispered. Nothing stays hidden forever, Blake replied. Especially the truth. Harold glanced at Jessica's grave, then back at Blake. What happens to me? That depends on you, Blake said. Resign from the board, disappear quietly, and I won't press charges. Stay, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did to Jessica, to Madison, to me. For a moment, Harold seemed ready to fight, but then his shoulders slumped. You never understood, Harold said softly. I did it all for the family name. No, Blake contradicted. You did it for yourself, and you sacrificed our family in the process. As Harold walked away, Blake turned back to Jessica's grave, placing his hand gently on the cool stone. It's over, he whispered. He can't hurt us anymore. A car approached on the cemetery path. Blake recognized the Parkers' old station wagon. Martha stepped out first, followed by Robert, moving slowly with his oxygen tank. Then, the back door opened and Madison bounded out, running toward Blake with tears streaming down her face. Daddy, she cried, throwing herself into his arms. Blake held her tightly, his own tears falling freely. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. Over Madison's shoulder, he saw Olivia emerge from the car, smiling through her tears. Beyond her, the morning sun broke fully through the mist, illuminating Jessica's name on the granite stone. A silent witness to the family that had, finally, after so many years, come together. 1 year later, Blake stood in the backyard of his childhood home, now transformed with bright flowers and a swing set. Laughter filled the air as Madison chased their new puppy Daisy across the freshly cut grass. The simple joy on his daughter's face was worth more than all the business deals he'd ever closed. Need a hand with those? Olivia asked, stepping onto the patio where Blake was arranging cupcakes for Madison's birthday party. Please, he smiled, pulling her close for a quick kiss. Their relationship had blossomed naturally over the past year, built on shared devotion to Madison and quiet moments stolen between school runs and bedtime stories. I can't believe she's 7 today, Blake marveled, watching Madison demonstrate to her grandparents how high she could swing. Robert and Martha Parker had become regular fixtures in their lives. Robert's health had improved remarkably once the stress of Harold's manipulations had lifted. Now they came for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, the past conflicts dissolving into genuine affection. Jessica would be proud, Olivia said softly, following his gaze. Of both of you. Blake nodded, his hand instinctively touching the framed photo of Jessica that held a place of honor in their living room. They spoke of her often, Blake added, keeping her memory alive for Madison through stories and traditions. The memory box Jessica had created had become a treasured ritual. Each birthday, Madison opened another letter from the mother she never knew. Daddy, look, Madison called, pointing toward the driveway where Sarah was arriving. With a large gift box. Sarah's here. Blake smiled at Madison's excitement. Sarah had become an honorary aunt, bridging Madison's past and present with stories about Jessica that kept her spirit alive in their home. The doorbell rang, and Blake excused himself to answer it. Rachel stood on the porch, now the executive, director of the Jessica Parker Foundation. Sorry I'm late, she said, handing him a brightly wrapped package. The board meeting ran long. The new scholarship program is launching next month. 15 children who've lost parents will receive full college funding. Blake felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest. The foundation had grown beyond his wildest hopes. helping hundreds of families in its first year. Jessica's legacy lived on in ways he could never have imagined when he'd made that fateful decision to prioritize love over power. "Any word from Harold?" Rachel asked cautiously. Blake shook his head. His uncle had disappeared from public life after their confrontation, reportedly living abroad. The occasional postcard arrived for Madison. Tentative, awkward attempts at connection that Blake neither encouraged nor prevented. She deserved to make her own decisions about family when she was older. "Blake!" Olivia called from the kitchen. Doorway. "It's time." Inside, they gathered around the dining table where a cake adorned with 7 candles awaited. Madison sat in the chair of honor, her eyes bright with excitement. Before lighting the candles, Blake handed her a small velvet box, another tradition they'd started. "This was your mother's," he explained as Madison revealed a delicate silver charm bracelet. "She wore it when she was your age." Madison fastened it carefully around her wrist next to the locket she never removed. "Do you think she can see us?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "I know she can," Blake assured her, emotion tightening his throat. After the candles were blown out and gifts unwrapped, Blake found a moment of quiet on the porch swing. Madison's laughter drifted from inside, where Olivia was helping her try on her new dress. The simple contentment of this moment, a happy child, a loving home, was everything. His phone buzzed with an email from the company board. Though no longer CEO, Blake remained connected to his father's legacy through the foundation. The company was thriving under new leadership, its charitable mission restored. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Blake reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 8 years lost with his daughter, years he could never reclaim. Yet the future stretched before them, bright with promise. The screen door creaked as Madison stepped outside, sitting beside him on the swing. "I read Mom's birthday letter," she said, leaning against his side. "What did she write?" Blake asked, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "She said to remember that love is the most important thing. More important than money or being important." Madison looked up at him seriously. "Like what you did, right? Choosing me instead of your company." Blake felt tears prick his eyes at her simple understanding of his most profound decision. "Exactly like that," he whispered. "I think she would be happy," Madison decided, her small fingers tracing the charm bracelet. "We made the family she wanted." Blake pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his heart full beyond measure. Jessica had known what mattered long before he did, but he'd finally learned the lesson she'd tried to teach him, that no success was worth sacrificing the people you love. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Blake and Madison sat together, gently swinging. Not the family he'd once imagined, but the one he was meant to have all along.